Hey everyone, Jessie here from Jessie on a Journey and Travel Blog Prosperity, back with another travel blogging tutorial. This is an interview pulled from my Profitable Travel Blogger podcast, and it is about a topic that I think is really important and isn't discussed enough because as travel bloggers, one of our biggest assets is our ability to create high quality content, which often includes photos. And something that I think is really important to understand is that your photos and your videos are worth money, whether you have 0 followers or 1 million followers. One issue I've noticed is that many travel bloggers and bloggers in other niches will give away their photos for free in exchange for free swag or free hotel stays, or brands will even put in their contracts that they get access to their camera roll. And many bloggers will say okay to it because they don't notice it or they don't know that they can argue this. So that's why this episode or this video is so important. Now, one of the biggest voices in the industry empowering travel bloggers to stop giving away their photos for free and start profiting off their hard work is Megan Indoe, the creator of the travel blogs Bobo and Chi Chi and Your Brooklyn Guide. Megan, along with her partner Scott, has been hired to create a seasonal media library for a destination client. They've also been able to license media assets for commercial use to different brands and destinations dozens of times. And today, Megan will be sharing her top tips to help you do the same. But first, I want to direct your attention to the video description or the QR code on your screen where I've shared a link to my free travel blogger resource library. Inside, you'll snag access to 55 plus resources, from cheat sheets to workbooks to workshops to video tutorials that can help you truly turn your blog into a profitable business. And that includes a cheat sheet on how to price, license, and sell your photography based on today's video. I am all about implementation, and I really want to make sure that you don't just listen to this interview and forget about it, but that you actually use what is shared to make your blogging life easier. Feel free to even pause this video to go grab those resources. You back? Then let's dive in. So, Megan, thank you so much for taking the time to share your tips. To start, can you just tell us more about yourself and your business?
Absolutely. So I started this travel blog with my husband, Scott Herder, 10 years ago in 2014 in South Korea when we were living there and teaching English. And at first, it sort of started out as a way to connect with our family and inspire other people doing what we were doing to travel around South Korea. And then as we traveled, the website traveled with us. And yeah, now we have grown it into a business where we partner a lot with different destinations or brands and use our not only our platforms to help amplify destinations or brands messaging, but through him. Scott is a photographer and videographer too. And so through that, we do a lot of visual storytelling, which sort of ties into what we're going to talk about today, because a lot of times we're even asked to license and sell our photography to destinations and brands during or after working with them.
And that actually segues perfectly into my next question, just kind of starting with the basics. What does it mean to price and license your photos, and how much can bloggers make from doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, when anyone wants to use your work for commercial purposes, whether that be a tour operator, a destination, or a brand, that all has value because your work is being used for profit. So, photographers, even photographers that are hired for weddings, are getting paid, and that's not being used for commercial purposes. So, what happens is, in order to like price these out, it kind of depends on the usage. So it can be, I mean, there's no like hard rule of how much photos are valued at. It just sort of depends on the usage and how much you can make. But a lot of our we make, I don't know, maybe an extra $15,000 a year just on licensing our photos. And these are typically with destinations or companies that we're already working with and decide to license our photos after the fact. And each of the pricing on each of the photos and assets are a different value depending on what the usage and term is that they're going to use your images for.
And when you say usage, you're talking about like commercial usage, or is it more how many times it'll be shown in a certain spot?
Absolutely. It's both, right? So, for example, since we work in the travel industry, I'm going to use a destination, for example. They may want to use a photo for their print brochures that they hand out for the destination. That has a different value than, say, they want to run an ad with it for like on social media or something. And this is all beyond like social media reshares. This is for things that they want to use for their marketing purposes. So anytime that they want to use your work, especially without credit, for any marketing purposes, there's a value in that.
Got it. And I want to talk a bit about contracts because I know personally I've had a lot of sort of sneaky clauses added to contracts like, oh, after this campaign, we get rights to your whole camera roll. I've definitely had that in there before, which is just wild to think about. What are some of the sneaky ways companies have tried to, that you've seen try to get photos and videos for free from bloggers and influencers?
So a lot of times, I mean, we've worked, I can't even remember how many years now, with different destinations. And typically, when you get a contract, the contract, if they're working with content creators or bloggers, is typically, and especially if your conversation was about this, is typically about you coming and creating content and distributing it across your channels. And what I'm seeing more and more frequently is when I get this contract, all of a sudden, and this hasn't been discussed, is that in addition to everything that we agreed upon with the distribution and content creation that's going to be shared on our channels, we've been seeing like, oh, and by the way, we want your whole media library in perpetuity. And what that basically means is that they can have every single photo that you take, and in perpetuity means forever and ever and ever, forever, and use it pretty much any way they like, depending on the wording in the contract. And while I like to give destinations and brands benefit of the doubt that they're just using some contract that they were given and sort of, you know, cut out the little parts that happened in a conversation, but the rest, the bulk of the contract is just a template they're using. But it's really important that you read through these contracts, and if you see anything like that, to flag it and maybe ask them, hey, if you want to use some of our photos, we need to have this discussion because it wasn't in our initial discussion, right? So that's going to have a different value. That's going to be something that you can either build in before the contract and build it into your pricing, or if it pops up like that surprisingly in your contract, you need to go back and either ask them to remove it or ask them to go back to the renegotiation phase of it and price out how much you're going to charge for them to have access to all of your digital library basically.
And that's such a good point about bringing up these things that you see. When I talk to bloggers who are maybe newer to working with brands, I feel like they don't know they can go back and kind of argue things. Like even when I was first starting, I was like, "Oh, can I say anything?" Now I always say something, and I rarely have any issues either when I've said, "Oh, we need to discuss that separately." I mean, I've never had a brand say, "Well, then we're not working with you." You can bring up these issues, and you absolutely should. Contracts are up for negotiation. You both have to be happy with what's included.
Absolutely. And I have had, I mean, I want to say in the last 2 years, this has been snuck into the contracts without conversation about it. And I've only gotten pushback from one, maybe two destinations. One, we like figured out something that worked for everybody. But most of the time they're like, oh, yeah, we can, we'll get rid of that. But I had one destination where it was a deal breaker. And we decided that it was best that we parted ways because neither of us felt like we were getting the value that neither of us were happy with the terms at that point. But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times if there's ever been any changes in a contract, more than times than not, they're willing to just amend that for you. And I don't find that like most places are doing this to like try to be sneaky or they're out to get you or anything. It's just something that happens to be in their contract. I don't know if somebody was advising them like, hey, just ask for this because so many people don't read their contracts or understand what they're signing away, and they've been able to get a lot of valuable assets this way. I completely understand why they would try to ask because that saves them a ton of money. But in the end of the day, you have to protect your work and understand what you're agreeing to and know that there is value in this, especially as the monetization streams in this industry continually evolving or changing at the whims of algorithms. This is one thing that you can protect.
And many bloggers realize they maybe shouldn't give away their photos for free for like use in ads and marketing materials. But what about resharing on social media? Like, let's say you go on a press trip and you're sharing on Instagram, and the tourism board or hotel, whatever brand, wants to reshare it on their feed. Do you typically charge extra for that, or do you just let them do that as part of the campaign?
I think this might be more of like an individual preference, but in my opinion, if they already invested in you and partnered with you and like you shared something and tagged them on social media, as long as it's a social media reshare on the native or original platform that you posted on with proper credit and tags, I'm typically okay with that because I find that to be a part of the collaboration. But anything beyond that, if they start ripping our Instagram photos off and start popping them all over their website and start using them for other purposes. That's usually where, if we didn't agree upon that, I have to go in and have a conversation and be like, hey, we license our photos beyond social shares. This is this is how we typically work and how like the general rule of thumb is. But I think it also depends on like who the creator is. Everyone kind of works differently. But I think that's generally accepted.
I agree. And I feel like that's often, when you go into a collaboration, I think many brands assume they can or they ask to make it a part of your contract. So I feel like you could even bake it into your price instead of saying, hey, it's extra. If that feels weird, you could maybe tweak your pricing even to be a bit more to include that too.
Yeah, and I feel like if you are a creator that has, you don't want the brand to reshare your content that you partnered on, that definitely needs to be brought up by you as the creator in the negotiation phase and make sure it's represented in the contract just to protect yourself and make sure that everyone sort of understands where the boundaries are. But yeah, that's why, contracts aren't just for the big companies and corporations. They're meant to protect you too. So it's really important that you sort of go through those, take the time and make sure that you tweak it to fit whatever it is that works for you as well.
Yeah. And I think this is a good point to segue into pricing. How do you recommend travel bloggers go about setting prices for their photography? Especially, this question comes up a lot, like in my travel blog prosperity membership. People want to sell their photos, but they don't even know where to begin.
Honestly, pricing is the hardest part. A lot of it has to do with you're also like dealing with different companies with different budgets and different capacities too. And I think that's something that you have to keep in the back of your mind when you're pricing. Like if you're selling to a little mom and pop shop, they're not going to have the same budget as if you're selling a photo to Walt Disney Corporation, right? Walt Disney Corporation or big corporation, you should definitely be charging your absolute full rates too. Sometimes you might have to make exceptions that you also are okay with if you're working with someone who doesn't have as many resources or a company that is much smaller, if that's something that you're comfortable with. But for as far as pricing goes, it really depends largely on usage. And I don't recommend just guessing or making up prices because this hurts the photography industry as a whole. And beyond being content creators, like there's a whole industry of photographers who have like baseline pricing that they use. So one tool that we like to have, and it was an investment, but it's investment that's paid for itself a million times over, is called Cradock Photo Pro. And it is a software you buy. What's nice about it is it's not like a subscription. Once you buy it, you own the software. And they actually get all of their pricing from real photographers who submit their pricing. And they update the database quite frequently. And so all of the data that they're collecting is up to date and from what real photographers use. So when you are looking in the software, which I think like it's when you license your first photo, you pay for the software and some, and then you have it forever. So it's a really good investment, and it's what we personally have been using for like the past 6 or 7 years, and what we recommend other people to use. But when you open up the platform, it sort of also guides you in what questions you need to ask before you can even get like say a price, because the price largely depends on how they intend to use it. And the one thing that you have to kind of like be a little delicate about is to not overcomplicate things for your potential customer, because the more you overcomplicate things and the more questions you ask, sometimes it scares them away. So like one of the common things that we're asked for is to license a photo in perpetuity. We don't like to do that because that means forever. And if you were to plug in all the information and type in and select in perpetuity, a single image can have a value of like thousands and thousands of dollars. And this is what real photographers are charging. But more than likely, if you're working with a destination or a brand within the travel industry, unless it's a huge, huge brand, they're not going to have that sort of budget to buy one image. And they really don't need a license in perpetuity because they're also going to probably want to refresh their imagery often. The only reason why they might ask for that is because they don't want to have to think about time limits on photos. So that the time usage is one factor in pricing. If they plan on using it on web and running ads, that's one factor. If they just plan on printing it, that's one factor. If they have, depending on where they print it or how they print it, that's another pricing factor. So that's why we like to use a software, because we can kind of figure out what questions to ask and get a good idea and give like a rough number that we use as a baseline to price out our individual photos for clients. Another thing that's really common is, say, like a destination, our most common thing to do is like they might want 10 images, and then we submit a media library for them and we give them a little bit of a bulk discount for committing to 10 photos. So what we found for online or web use only on the software, the price can be anywhere from 250 to $400 for a single image for online usage only. And so what we do is we have an individual photo and it's priced at $250. And then if they want to buy 10, we drop the price down to $200 a photo, making the whole package worth $2,000. And this is for a term of 1 year. Sometimes they're not ready to use the image right away. So I just ask them to let me know when they want to start the license. And then I keep track of that. If they plan on using the images longer, then I try to keep track of that for them so that they don't have to ask for in perpetuity. That way they don't have to manage the media library and the assets. And like, it's kind of like herding cats if they have like 500, a database of 500 images and they've gotten 200 of them from different bloggers and they all have different expiration dates. We tend to be a little more lenient and like not be so strict with 1 year, even though we price it out for that. If they're still using it a couple years later, then we might be able to revisit them and be like, hey, we only agreed to 1 year. Do you want to renew this license, or do you want to, take the photo down and replace it? So it kind of all depends. There's no like hard line rules, but I do find that that software is really helpful because it gives you the power and to not only have a price that actual photographers are charging, but then if they have any questions or are unfamiliar with the pricing of photography, you have an industry-wide tool that you could actually reference. And we've even taken screenshots of the license price before and reference that to clients who like weren't quite sure understood where we were getting this pricing from, and it was really helpful. They ended up thanking us, and then we ended up proceeding and they bought, I think, like 15 or 20 photos from us.
How do you keep track of the licenses? Is it like a spreadsheet or does the software do that or
So if you do buy, we have the very low level of the software, which I feel like is fine for what we're doing. But if you want to invest in like an upper tier, because they have different tiers, they have like a whole database in it that lets you track time limits on the photos, and you can enter all that. So it does that for you. And I think if we were, I mean, we probably could upgrade to it, but in hindsight, maybe we should have selected that. For now, what we do is it's only usually, I don't know, a handful of clients every year. So I just manually check it to see if they're using the photos. I typically don't monitor those photos for any other usage, and just because they were licensed out. I probably should be, but to keep things easier for myself, because being a blogger means you have a million other jobs as well. Um, I just sort of keep track and keep an eye on things manually. But if you're doing this at a larger volume, then you probably definitely want to pay for the higher level of the software where it keeps track for you, or keep a nice and organized Excel sheet.
and we started talking about this a bit, but the licensing is another important piece of selling photography. Can you just share more about the different licenses and how bloggers can go about choosing which one is appropriate when working with brands?
Absolutely. So anytime that you are talking to a destination about licensing photos, first of all, let them know this is a service you offer when you're in the conversation of like, talking about partnering with them in the first place. say, I do X, Y, and Z on our channels. This is the type of content we build. And when you're building on a package with them, let them know, by the way, if you need any content for your own channels, we also provide digital media libraries and digital assets that you can use for your marketing materials as well for an extra fee. And the easiest way to go about this is to have them agree up front. And not everyone's already ready to agree up front because they haven't seen the product yet. So we don't really push for it too hard. But what happens is if you're able to get them to agree up front, you can just give them some sample packages that you create that are for maybe just web use only. And then if they decide that they want to use it for a print brochure or anything else later, they can come back and contact you and you can, figure out what the additional fee is by, plugging it into the software and figuring out what you want to charge them for. Um, that's what I find to be the easiest way. Then the other pro about having the conversation earlier is you can also kind of figure out maybe where they have content gaps or communicate with them and say, hey, you're sending us on this itinerary. You have probably holes or gaps in your media library. If you want to give us a wish list of places that, we're going to that you might need more images of, we'll do our best to take photos that can be used for your, marketing catalog. And in that case, you can take photos if they give it to you, which we've had it in some cases, and it increases your chances to sell photos because you're capturing things that they actually need. That's a really great way to go about it. And then, when you're pricing things out, you just have to ask how they intend to use it, especially if they come back to you later and be like, hey, we really like this photo. We want to use it in our brochure. First, you have the first bit of information. They want to use it in their brochure, which probably means it's either going to be in a PDF format or print. So I would probably just price it out for print. The next thing you would ask them, especially if you're using the software, you'll get a little more familiar with it as you fumble around with it the first few times, is then you have to ask the circulation. Are they printing this out for 100,000 copies? Are they printing out 500,000 copies? Those types of things sort of impact the price a little bit. And again, you don't want to overcomplicate things, but it kind of gives you, if you play around with the software, it gives you kind of an idea of the price jump and difference. And maybe you can find something in the middle if they're not able to provide all the answers to you right away. But it really helps to price things out depending on the usage because they all have different values.
And would it always be a commercial license, even if, let's say, the brand is using it just on their blog, like maybe not in a sales page, but they want images for blog usage? It's kind of editorial, but they are a business. Like, would it still be that commercial license?
I would say yes, because if they are the marketing agency for that destination, everything, all the content that they're creating is the marketing material for that destination. So that would fall under commercial licensing.
Got it. Now, you kind of did touch on this already, but I wanted to just see if you had any other tips. When working with brands, how do you go about selling your photography? I know you kind of talked about discussing it in the negotiation phase.
So we like to first let people know this is a service we offer because that increases our chance for them to sell it because they don't, it's not something that is naturally thought of all the time when we're talking to content creators. They might just be thinking about the Instagram post that you're going to share. They're not thinking about other ways that you might be able to provide value for them. So I find that being able to just put it all out there and let them know everything that we do, we end up picking up interest earlier on and maybe are able to negotiate the package at the negotiation phase. Or they are like, okay, let's agree to look at your media library after the fact, and then we'll commit to however many photos we want. I find that to be a really, really, really useful way, um, to get the ball rolling versus waiting for someone to say, hey, I want this photo from you, which happens too, but it's helpful if you let them know it's a service that you offer. Another thing that I would like to point out is that you want to make your images licensable. And to do that means you have to be very careful about people's faces in your images. You can't, if no one's walking around with, what is it, model disclosures or agreements. So it's one thing if you're posting something on your channel, even there's some gray area, but if you're going to be selling a photo, you don't have model releases. So you either have to make sure that you're taking photos with, either using tools in Photoshop where you're removing people who have their face in your image, or it's generally okay if it's the back of their head or things like that. Being mindful of that, you also technically can't license certain landmarks or buildings that it's not allowed. So it's really good to know which landmarks have known restrictions. For example, the most famous example I think is the twinkling lights at the Eiffel Tower. Like I don't even think you're allowed to post that on social media, let alone sell it because it's protected. Other things include like the Empire State Building. The Empire, if you just have a photo where the Empire State Building is the sole subject, you can't license that out. But if it's a part of a bigger scene, then there's gray area and technically you can. So like you can still license out a photo of New York City skyline. You just if the only thing in 90% of the frame is the Empire State Building, you can't license that out. So it's really helpful to familiarize yourself with that. There is a list, I believe Getty or Shutterstock has a whole like list of known image restrictions. And one of the stock photography websites has a really, really nice resource for that. And then another thing to keep in mind is you might want to consider if you are in the front and center in the image and your face and likeness is being used to make sure that you're charging something that you're comfortable with if they're going to be like running ads with it and your face is front and center of attention. That's something that I think people forget to consider, or like if you are a family travel blogger and your kids are even going to be in it, you might want to read up a little bit on how you need to be charging for that as well, because you start getting into touchy area, you might even have to do like a model release or something.
Those are really good tips. I remember it wasn't necessarily about licensing photos, but I spoke to a lawyer once. This was early in my working with brands days. And there was some kind of, well, it was licensing photos. I was giving them some type of photo as part of it. And there was an in perpetuity thing. And he was like, never give that, especially if you're in the photo, because if that brand has a scandal and then your face is in their ads, and I have had that happen before. I mean, I wasn't in the photos, but I have worked with a brand on a campaign. I don't really want to name any names, but the campaign was focused around this chef who did have a Me Too moment. So, that
Ah,
could have been very dicey if I was like in their ads and, you know, things you don't think about
yeah, it looks like you're
initially, but
endorsing it.
yeah,
It's
so that could be a little tricky.
There's a million reasons why I would say not to agree to perpetuity unless it really makes sense. They're not going to need the image for forever in most cases, but try to avoid that at all costs. For that great example you just said, especially if you're in it. But yeah, and it's another thing that I'd like to bring up too is that when you are setting the terms to your photo licensing, not only make sure that the contract is clear, but when you invoice them, make sure that like you have a line saying what the terms are in your invoice too, so you can cross reference it, and there's no room for there to be any misunderstanding of what the usage that both parties agreed to are. Another thing is if they don't have a photo licensing agreement. So typically our contracts as influencers or content creators or bloggers is a contract that the destination or brand provide to us. If you are doing your photo licensing separate, don't be afraid to provide your own contract for that. You don't need to hire a lawyer. Legal Templates actually has a bunch of great free templates online. If you just Google, um, you know, photo licensing contract free legal templates, a couple pop up and you can download it and then just tweak it with your business information and then whatever the licensing terms you agree to. That way you have some protections, and there's some nice free resources like that for like small business owners that don't have the capacity to hire an entire legal team to license a few $100s worth of photos.
Yeah, and if you live in a big city, so the way I actually got to work with a lawyer was I didn't pay for it. In New York, we have NELP, neighborhood entrepreneurial, no, neighborhood entrepreneurial, something like that. Law project. That's a hard word to say. Um, it's free. It's like 30 minutes a month of free legal assistance for small business owners. And I'm sure other big cities, maybe even smaller cities, have these resources. You just have to look for them.
That's good to know.
Now, many travel bloggers pitch brands to work together on influencer campaigns where they're creating the content that gets shared on their channels. And, it's more of the influencer promoting the brand type of thing. But I'm curious if you ever pitch campaigns that are 100% focused on creating commercial license photography or videography.
So typically, when we are talking to a destination or brand, it's usually as content creators and to do the distribution on our channels. But there has been times where clients have come back to us and they have hired us just to come and do their building out their media library. One client was in upstate New York, and they actually we signed a year contract with them, and we came out every season for about 4 or 5 days each time, and we captured seasonal content from them from a wish list, and you know build out their whole media library for them. So it is possible. I wouldn't say it's as common, but yeah, it's definitely something that we have been requested. There have been times where maybe their marketing budget looked a little funny and they weren't able to commit to deliverables because sometimes when they're licensing photos, it's coming from a different budget than like their content creator budget, right? And if you're working with a smaller destination who has less resources, they got a little creative and they said, okay, instead of hiring you for content creation and distribution on your channels, how about you guys come out, shoot photos, we'll license X amount of photos from you because it came from a different budget and they had budget and they wanted to pay us something for our time and effort. And they're getting an extreme amount of value from it, from getting to use our photos. But then they're like, if there's anything that you feel like sharing after the trip, great. And there were no said deliverables, which was really nice because it gets a little tricky when then they give you a whole list of deliverables and content you have to do. And I'm like, well, no, I charge for that. So there was no pressure to post anything. We still posted things because we post things from even our own independent travel. But it was a creative way to work with this destination. Not everyone, again, is working with the same budget. And if someone you want to really work with, you figure out a way to make it work. And that was a really nice way to do that.
Yes. And that actually brings me to my next question really nicely. Let's say someone listening has never worked with brands, they've never done like a press trip or a brand partnership in that way, but they have traveled a ton and they have tons of trip photos, maybe really nice photos in their media library. Is there a way that they can sell those photos back to a brand or destination?
We've never really done this by like reaching out or cold pitching anybody with our media assets. What often happens is they'll find our image through like search results or something organically and say, hey, we like this image. Can we use it? And then I ask them what they want to use it for and have sold images that way. Another thing that used to happen more often was on social media, people would reach out. But I feel like there is this software that sort of replaced those requests. And everyone's probably seen it before. It's when you go to a destination or feature a brand or something, and you get this like automated reply on Instagram that says like, "Hey, we love this image. Can we use it?" Reply #yes, whatever the brand name is or destination is. Um, and we'll be sure to share it. Read our terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions are typically hidden somewhere or it's a non clickable link. And I urge you, if you ever get one of those, first of all, it's not a human sending it, it's an automated system that they pay for. Read the terms and conditions and see they're not offering you payment. And it doesn't really mean like if you say yes, it isn't really opening up a door for you to work with them because there's no human interaction or human component to this. When you go look at these terms and conditions, which are often very hard to find, they usually say that they own your image. They can actually license it out. I've seen this before where they can actually sell your image to other people. You don't get a cut of it, they do. They can run any ad or do anything they want with it for as long as they want, worldwide, forever. And like the license is typically something that is valued at like thousands and thousands of dollars per image. And people don't realize that just by replying #yes, thinking that they're going to be featured on someone's like Instagram, they think it's like really flattering, but really it's a way to bypass and get a bunch of digital assets for free and not have to pay for it, which I don't know, puts a really sour taste in my mouth because they make it so hard for you to understand what you're signing away. And I don't think people realize that until later when they see their image on a billboard and are like, I didn't agree to this. And then they realize, oh yes, I did because they sent me a message on Instagram And it just doesn't sit right with me that there is a company out there that makes money, but the person who created the image and made the image and maybe paid out of pocket to go do this trip doesn't see a dime of it. So that's something to be careful about. I know that kind of strayed away from the question you asked. But yeah, I find that most of our partnerships with our images personally are through connections of people that we've already worked with or people who reach out to us because they found our images through our blog post or on Google. And it's typically not on social media anymore. It used to be, but those predatory softwares have kind of taken up the space and it's getting a little harder to fight for the value of pricing images if they're used to getting them from free from people that don't realize what they're signing away, which is the whole reason why I'm excited to be here talking about this, because the more and more that we educate each other and educate these brands and destinations of, hey, this has value, you plan on using this for profit or commercially for some commercial purpose, I deserve to be, in on it.
Yes, that's such, and I love that you actually did bring up the Instagram thing, because that is something everyone needs to be aware of since it is so prevalent, and like you said, people might not really realize what they are agreeing to, and it hurts the whole industry in the long run when people are just giving away everything for free that really is worth money.
It's crazy because I've seen, like, first it started out, this company was working with just destinations and they got a bunch of money during the pandemic. It was like a startup, I think around, I don't know if it was a startup. I don't want to misspeak, but I know that they got a lot of funding and were like a top growing company even during the pandemic. And it was a way for destinations also to get fresh content. I understand why this is desirable for them. First, I want to say that I understand why this is a very desirable tool for them. And there's other things that this software does that's not just this that are valuable. But this particular part of their software I don't like at all. Um, but now I'm noticing that it used to just be regional like destinations and stuff that they worked with. And now I'm noticing that big companies like Target and Nike are working with them because of the success of people not understanding what they're signing away. And I even see conversations about it pop up on threads all the time, and I try to reply to as many as I can. People are asking, like, what does this mean? Does this mean when Target commented on my photo of me, where she was a paying customer, posted a photo, and she got one of these automated messages. And she's like, what does this mean? Does that mean, will this open up a door to work with them? And no, it won't. It won't. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but there's no human element here. Nobody from their marketing team and whatever influencers and stuff they're picking out, they're not looking at this. There's no human element of it. It's just a way to scrape content and not have to pay for it. So it's just really, really good to be aware of this and spread awareness of it to protect your work. Because if people are going to be profiting off of your work, you definitely deserve a cut of it.
Such a good point. And, you talked about protecting your work. I know we already did talk about this, but I just want to see if there were any other ways that you might or people could track the way people are using their images.
So there's a software called CopyTrack, and it's actually just a website, and you sign up, and it's free to sign up. You upload your media library. I recommend only uploading photos that you have shared online or on your website, so that way you don't fill up all of your storage and space. And what it does is it takes a little time, but it crawls the internet and it sees if there is any use of this beyond maybe your website, or domains that you've whitelisted, and it has hits. And sometimes the hits are like way off and you have to go through manually and say, this is not my photo. This is not my photo. But what happens is sometimes you'll find one of your photos being used illegally. And when you go through it, you will have to manually submit a claim. And you go through this process and you let them know that I've never put this on a Creative Commons. This is my photo. I'm the only one that owns a license to it, so on and so forth. And then they have like an automated pricing tool depending on how it was used that they come up with, or you can do your own pricing. I tend to use their tool. And then if they go out and these are lawyers and they reach out to whoever it is that misused your photo, and they try to get you a claim or paid for damages for using your image illegally. And if you win a case, then the lawyer just takes a cut of that. So there's no upfront cost for you, which is really great. And we've had a lot of successful payouts The only thing I would urge you to do is make sure that you go through each of your hits very carefully, because if you make a mistake or waste a lawyer's time, sometimes they will charge you a fee, which you don't want to do. Now, there's like a little bit of, I don't know, I feel like they're getting a little bit of a bad reputation lately because a lot of bloggers who use stock photography, for some reason, CopyTrack is letting stock photographers sort of abuse their services. And people that have stock photos, I don't think they should be able to use this service, because how do you track all of these licenses and everything? I don't even know if these stock sites give you access to who licensed it or not. But what's happening is a lot of bloggers are receiving these threatening letters from CopyTrack, and it's a legitimate stock photo that they got. And they all like are like, don't, ignore CopyTrack. It's a scam. It's not a scam. All you have to do is reply to them, show proof that you have the image, which you can use something like Shutterstock. It keeps track of all of that. And then just let them know, like, hey, this was a stock photo. I didn't think that stock photos or stock photographers could pursue these cases. Here's my proof that it's mine. And I know that it's annoying and it's frustrating, but if you are using stock images, you need to sort of be responsible for if these things happen, and have it only takes a couple seconds to find proof if you're using a legitimate stock site. Just send that. I really don't like that they're doing that, because it is otherwise a legitimate service, and it stinks that, some stock photographers are abusing that and giving them a really bad reputation.
Yeah, that's one reason I know you use Shutterstock. I use Deposit Photos, but I love that they keep receipts. Every time I download a photo, it's saved right there. I always have a log. I don't need to, like with Pexels, if you don't have a place. I mean, maybe you can create an account on there. I'm not actually sure, but I feel like there isn't like that paper trail that's so easy as with the paid services like Shutterstock and Deposit Photos.
Absolutely. And then yeah, I would also be really careful of using free stock photos, because a lot of these companies that are accepting it, they don't really do their due diligence and making sure that that's the actual author or photographer of that image. And I know that like Unsplash sort of had a problem like back in like 2018. And I think I had used maybe a couple of their images at the time to fill in some stuff on my website. And I went since like removed them right away when I found out about this, because they were having photographers come and want to claim for damages on the photos because they never uploaded it to Unsplash. Some random user did. And then Unsplash was like wiping themselves clean of it and be like, it's not our responsibility. We're just, if they're on our site, it's your responsibility because you're using them and they were free. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I will never use a free stock photo again. I will only pay. Um, yeah, that's just a cautionary tale of stock photography. Just be aware that you might have a little more headaches. I don't personally, knock on wood, get a lot of like issues with our stock photos, but I know some people really do. But we only use a very small percent of them to like fill in little gaps that we have, or a photo that didn't turn out great. Um, so hopefully I didn't just jinx myself.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your tips. I feel like this was like a class in not just pricing and licensing, but also like protecting yourself. Before we sign off, can you just let everyone know where they can find you?
Absolutely. So our main travel blog is boboandchichi.com. We also have a New York City and Brooklyn-based website called Your Brooklyn Guide. And our social media channels, we're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. And the handles are Your Brooklyn Guide and Bobo and Chichi.
Amazing. And I will have all of Megan's links in the show notes. All right. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you feel inspired and empowered to start earning an income from your travel photography. Don't forget to grab access to the free travel blogger resource library that I've linked in the video description or via the QR code on your screen. There are a ton of resources in there on growing your community and increasing your blogging profits, including a cheat sheet for pricing, licensing, and selling your photography. And of course, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos sharing strategies for bloggers who want to turn their blogs into profitable full-time businesses. Happy blogging!